Peace and freedom and grace be with you. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of Hardfire. We're in the middle of a very vigorous discussion about 9/11 truth issues or 9/11 debunking, pertaining mainly to Building 7. We have two extraordinary guests. We have Richard Gage by video feed, who is head of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And we have Mark Roberts, who is a very well-researched 9/11 truth debunker. And we're in the middle of, part of it was a structured discussion, which is in our first presentation, and we're still in the middle of that. We're closing up on that, and then we're going to have more of a freewheeling conversation about this controversy, about what brought down the Solomon building of World Trade Center, or better known as Building 7. Mark was in the middle of a rebuttal to a point relating to, you can explain it.
Relating to Richard's claim that tons of molten iron, he says, were found under the World Trade Center buildings after they collapsed. Again, this material was never tested. We don't know exactly what it was. We do know it was very hot there. Of course, there were raging fires in those buildings for a long time. Building 7 burned for about 7 hours. We don't know if it was hot enough to melt steel, as Richard is claiming. These are anecdotal observations that he's talking about, which is natural to say. If you pull up a red-hot column, which is not anywhere near the melting temperature of steel, I and you might say that's molten steel right there. Now, I've talked to many people who were at the site afterwards and who were instrumental in the cleanup operations, from grappler operators to fire department people in charge of safety, to the structural engineers who were underground and actually looking at this stuff. None of them saw anything resembling what Richard says, tons of iron. He's making that up, by the way. Dave Peraza, the structural engineer in charge of the whole cleanup operation there, said to me, "I never saw pools or lakes of molten or previously molten steel, neither in the subgrade levels nor as material that was loaded onto trucks by the grapplers and cranes." And he says, by the way, some of the conspiracy theories state that the steel was sent to scrapyards, presumably to destroy evidence of the conspiracy. I participated in that decision, ultimately made by the DDC, not to retain the majority of the steel. I guess I was part of the conspiracy, he says.
So, just one question about there are firefighters who also said that they saw molten steel or described it as such. Are they not expert witnesses, or only the critics of 9/11 Truth experts?
Not at all, because other metals that melt at much lower temperatures can appear to be golden and molten like that also.
But was he, as a firefighter, qualified enough to know the difference?
Not at all. Not at all. One thing we see is that, for example, in the parking lots, the aluminum wheels, alloy wheels, had melted off the cars. Richard's not going to claim that the terrorists were in there putting thermite on the wheels of cars, I don't think. We know it was that hot in areas that were both under the buildings and around the buildings. Just from the fires, an incredible amount of fuel, just from the fires that occurred for several months afterwards. There's 36% iron oxide in the pigment of the World Trade Center structural steel paint.
May I bring up a point that one of the reasons we're able to have a discussion about what this residue or signature signifies is because the other side, the 9/11 Truth investigating side, was able to get some portion of some of the debris from some of the buildings. Almost all of it was unavailable to independent researchers.
Not true.
Apart from what got to Dr. Stephen Jones.
Thomas Cahill in California. Lots and lots of people have studied the dust because they were doing health studies. Lots of people have. The dust that Richard's talking about was collected, most of it well after the events. People are doing torch.
We're not just talking about the dust. I'm talking about actual steel stuff
This is
from
what we're
the
talking
building.
about.
Well, let's look at the North Tower, because this is where most of these iron-rich microspheres were produced, is in the explosions of these 90,000 tons of concrete, which is found missing at the bottom of both the North and the South Tower. In fact, there's 110 floors that collapsed. We would expect to see 50 or 20. We don't even see one floor. In fact, they've been shredded. Not only the concrete, but the decking and the floor trusses underneath. Not one has been found. And pulverized this concrete to like 10 microns, smaller than a human hair, most of it. Let's look at the collapse of the North Tower now. It's really important.
Well, Richard, can we address that point first? Because it sounds like we're skipping around a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
You say that 90,000 tons of concrete is missing and all that, and that virtually everything is pulverized to a very fine dust, micron-sized dust. Here's a quote from someone who examined some of the World Trade Center dust. We found large chunks of concrete as well as medium-sized pieces of wallboard with the binding paper still attached. Thus, the pulverization was not, in fact, to fine dust, and it is a false premise to start with near-complete pulverization.
When we see this destruction on television, and we see the videotape, it's a bit hard to understand where things were or where are they now. Can you tell us, can you point out what is what in this maze of rubble and destruction?
This was the South Tower. This was 104, 106 stories tall. This is what is left. Up there was the North Tower. And my office used to be in this building. For my first 3.5 years as governor, my office was on the 57th floor here. Hi, how are you? We're so proud of you guys.
How you doing, Governor?
God bless you.
Thank you.
Where are you from?
Staten Island, engine 153.
Well, we're proud of you guys.
Staten Island.
It's just, and you look, and you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel.
What happened to the concrete?
The concrete was pulverized, and I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of Lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust powdered 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
And what's to explain, Governor, the smoke that still comes out of the fire?
There's still fire down below. There is such an incredibly deep pile of rubble, and the tower goes down 5-6 stories underground. That there's still fire under.
But we had 110 floors, and the point is that most all of them are missing. If you look at the base of both of these towers after they fall, there is only a pile of 2 to 3 story structural steel and aluminum cladding. All of the photos show that. There are no floors found at the top or anywhere near that pile. Maybe down in the basement is what you're referring to. That's not what I'm referring to.
Mark is going to speak again. I just have to say,
Well, Mark just spoke.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's talk about the North Tower. The North Tower begins its collapse, as you can see here on the photo, the 15 stories above the collapse zone are compressing in on itself such that within 4 seconds this entire upper section, which is supposed to drive this building down at free fall speed almost, against 80,000 tons of cold, intact, hard structural steel. But what we can see is there's no pile driver after 4 seconds. The building is tearing itself apart after that, hurling debris every direction symmetrically at 70 to 100 miles an hour, instant acceleration out of the building, landing up to 600 feet laterally.
And used the term like an explosion, or I thought it was a bomb going off. Only 2 of them use a similar term for the other collapse. And when you read the accounts in context, that's perfectly clear, because they had no idea what was happening with the first collapse. They weren't expecting it. So usually they would hear it, look up, see the building starting coming down, and they're running for their lives.
I encourage
now, Richard, on your website and in your presentations, you say 118 people, first responders, also saw flashes. Guess how many the real number is out of the 503 accounts that those are taken from? The real number is 2, Richard. But what you did is you took those 2 accounts, you split them up into several accounts, and didn't identify them each time to pretend like more people said they saw flashes. 2 people said they saw flashes.
Let me respond.
I encourage the listeners, the viewers of this program, to go to Journal of 9/11 Studies and read the report themselves.
So do I.
It is
thoroughly convincing.
I encourage them to go to my site and read my reputation.
Let Richard finish.
You're going to be fair with
me, or we're not going to have a debate.
This makes me mad.
Many of these of the reporters, dozens of them, recording, feeling the explosions in their bodies, 1,700 feet down at the ground level, as these explosions were happening up above.
Name one.
Now,
Name
let's
one.
talk. Let me bring up the next subject. Otherwise, we'll just rehash the same type of argument. Now, we're going to talk about how these buildings came down. I have with me 110. I have a 95-story building. I have 2 15-story buildings that I'm going to drop. I'm holding them up. I'm going to drop them at the same time. This is going to show that we have what amounts as a virtual free fall speed, unimpeded, as I'm dropping the 15-story building over nothing at all on one side and over a 95-story building on the other. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh my God, the one that had no resistance under it falls at free fall speed.
Because we've learned something about physics, that if you drop something from a short height onto something bigger than it, what do you think's going to happen? Is your bus going to land on there? Is it going to bounce off? Here you go, from 0 to the fastest speed you can go. What's going to happen? You're going to bounce off? Maybe bounce off that way, maybe bounce off that way. Maybe you kind of crash into them. Well, we learned, they say everything changed on 9/11. Well, one thing changes our understanding of physics. What's going to happen is you're going to go all the way till you hit the store. Now, that's all you got to understand is it's not what you think. You can't use your common sense. You have to use physics. Now, that's you and your VW bus. Now, what happens when your buddy shows up at the store in his VW Bug and he runs into a bus, which is 7 times as big as his car? Do you think's going to happen? He's going to bounce off of there? Nope, same thing's going to happen. His car dropping onto this other bus is going to go straight to the ground like there was nothing there. And that's something that we learned about physics on 9/11, and I think that we're going to have to pay attention to this new physics. And that's all I got to say. Goodbye.